So, on to today's topic of who exactly am I? A moral inventory. Who exactly am I? Easy subject, isn't it? Define yourself in 3 words or less. God, beauty, love. That's not bad. So, since the beginning of the year, we chose as our theme is to be a vessel for transformation. And what we've done is to assist in that transformation as we created a spiritual set of principles or roadmap to assist us in that transformational process. And so what we've done is we've combined the 12 steps of AA along with the 12 promises of AA and put them together with 12 spiritual principles of new thought along with 12 action steps. And so as we enter into this month of April, the 4th month means the 4th step. This is where it gets good. This is where we quit thinking and we get to start doing. And so we want to look at what it looks like. Isn't that a great, our program again, really good. Way to go, Dre. You do such a good job every month. As we look at what's inside of some of our heads that we're trying to get rid of, we'll look at our 4 steps here. Is step 4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves is what we'll look at today, and then for the rest of the month we'll look at our spiritual principles, courage, we'll know peace, and we'll come to grips with our burdens, mistakes, and secrets. So as we explore into that 4th step of made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, this step is about coming face to face with our truths, our lives, our actions, and our behaviors. And it takes courage. That's why courage is part of this step, the spiritual principle. And this, quite frankly, is not a step for the lighthearted, for the faint of heart. This is an opportunity to become perfectly honest for all the times in our lives that we have not magnified or amplified Spirit God. Oh, anybody got one time in your life at least that you did not amplify, glorify, magnify the beauty of Spirit in your life? One? Okay, good. That's it. All right. Woo, man, we're up to like 15. Usually it's like 3 people, and it's always the same 3. So that's good that we're there. So that's what we want to do, is take an honest and sincere approach and look, and in a sense turning inward to do that self-inventory on those times in our life where we haven't amplified, magnified, glorified our highest and best good. From the 12-step organization, we read, I'm one step ahead of myself here. From Robert Louis Stevenson, to prepare us in this journey, he says, you cannot run away from your weaknesses. You must at some time fight it out or perish. And if that be so, why not now, right where you stand? So how many of us have something that might show up in our moral inventory? I mean, a complete and honest moral inventory. If we looked at every moment of our life, especially since the time that we've been an adult, a year ago. Whenever that thing comes. But if we looked at our life and we looked at everything that is in our moral inventory of ourselves, is there something in there we've been running from that we just don't want to look at, we don't want anybody to know about, and boy, have we spent a lot of time and energy at protecting and hiding it. So what is the benefit of doing that? And what I've often found is the benefit that we believe is based on protecting ourselves from what others may think of us. Because many of us have something on that list that we do not want others to know about us. And what I'm going to share with you today is when we look at doing our moral inventory, I'm not inviting you to post it on Facebook. Not a good idea if you ever want to be employed in the future. But what I'm looking at is, what are those things that we have allowed our fear of what others may think of us to prevent us from doing that inventory of self? And how long do we have something on that list that we have been carrying with us? How many years? Oh. Now, the thing about doing a moral inventory, I'm not saying write it out and come next week and share it with everybody in the audience. I'm talking about it's between you and God, this inventory list. And the great thing that we've looked at the first 3 months, and what New Thought is continuously teaching us, is that God holds nothing against you. You have nothing on your list that the higher power that you live and breathe and walk from and look at and witness and experience the beauty through the daffodils, the precision work that created a flower. If you ever wondered about God, pick up a flower, for God's sake, and examine that baby. That thing that created it, it's not going to hold anything that you got on your list against you. What it's going to do is, as we share that stuff, it's going to create that sense of freedom. But it's that fear of what will others think that keeps us stuck. And usually what those others will think, we usually go back and base it on our childhood experiences or somebody that we're in a relationship, which is what we're going to examine through here as we move on through the importance of doing this step in our life. And as we examine during the first 3 steps of AA, we've turned our attention from our unhealthy habits, and that's what we're looking at. I'm not saying everybody's walking around carrying 10 addictions. Maybe, but not quite. But we do have unhealthy habits and behaviors that we have practiced. And what we're looking at this year is any of those unhealthy habits, behaviors, or perhaps addictions that when we're practicing them at any time, they are not supporting our inner self, our inner well-being to its highest and best good, or those closest to us, or our community at large. That's what we're looking at. And if you're clean in all those matters, are currently right now and have been your whole life, bless you. Bless you, because I can't wait till, let's see. It's going to be a unique opportunity when that shifts at some moment in your life, because I don't know if we go through life without experiencing some of that stuff, a moment or two. And often when we experience our unhealthy behaviors and habits, what it brings forth is we have the opportunity to face the truth of our situation and turn that situation over to the power of God. Now it's time to start seeing things as they truly are, rather than through the glass of our addicted or unhealthy behaviors that are imprinted in our minds and hearts. The first step in the process of getting real is to take that honest inventory of one's life. Exactly where have you been? What have you done? And how far did you go in your addictive behaviors or bad habits? When and where did they start? And where have they led you? This is a vital step away from the unhealthy life filled with chaos and insane behaviors towards a conscious life filled with more personal power and serenity. Have you ever had a moment when you look back and you thought, man, when you were doing it, that was really a good time. Man, it was fun. Everybody was like enjoying it, and then you realize, and then, you sober up. Whether that's really sobering up or 5 years later you sober up, and you look back and you go, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. That was anybody have one of those insane behaviors? I think of when my friend and I were 15 years old, 35 years ago, and we invented, I think, one of the early beer bongs the world has seen. Everybody know what a beer bong is? Still haven't got up here yet, huh? It's coming. It was only 35 years ago. It's a long piece of tube like so, clear plastic, and my best friend growing up worked at, his dad owned a plumbing store, so we had access to all kinds of goodies. So we wanted to figure what could we use out of a plumbing store that would aid in our ability to down drink beer. So most of you probably wouldn't think of going to a plumbing store. We did. I didn't say it was normal behavior. And so then you take a large funnel and you take a C-clamp and you screw that hose on the end of that funnel and you pour a beer into it. And you can down a beer, I heard, in 1.8 seconds. A whole beer, 12 ounces. Now, I heard, these are all rumors. And I also heard that I could do 15 beers in an hour at less than 2 seconds a pop. And then when you get bored, you throw a little whiskey in at the end. So when I look back on it, insane behavior. But at the time, was I proud of it? Man, I bragged about that. I had that thing for years. I was the coolest dude. I could hang out with my brother 10 years older. They never saw a beer bong. And so how many of those things, though, do we have? And that's kind of a joking, funny one. It wasn't real healthy. Trust me, 15 beers in an hour, I don't care how big you are, not a good idea. Half a day, not so bad. But the great thing is you didn't care what kind of beer it was because taste was irrelevant. So you could drink cheaply. So anyway, how many of us, though, when we look back, we have a moment in our life where we go, man, that wasn't so good. How many of us have periods of time in our life where we felt disconnected, where it felt like we were really living an insane life? And don't take that as like I've completely lost my mind. I mean, it's like, oh my God, the chaos and dysfunction I was going through. How did I get out of bed and make it through each one of those days that turned into weeks, that turned into months, that turned into years? Anybody have a period of time when you look back and you go, oh, wow, I made it. I made it. Great. 3 people and they were all new. The rest of you have been great, I can tell. Way to go, new people. All right. So we want to look at and find out exactly when and where our natural desires have ever warped us. Anybody have a natural desire that you thought was natural and man, you went after it with everything you did and you found out by going after it, boy, it didn't make life too good? We wish to look squarely at the unhappiness that has caused ourselves and others. By discovering what our emotional, perhaps unhealthy deformities are, and can we move towards correcting those behaviors? Carl Jung, as we'll mix in the psychology in a couple of places today, and I consider Carl Jung one of the greatest psychologists of our time. I was telling Crystal if there was a few people that I wanted to meet from the 20th century and would love to sit at a round table with and have a discussion, he'd be at the forefront of it. Carl Jung is a brilliant. I have no idea what his personal life was. I'm not measuring him by that. I'm measuring him by his teachings and his innovation, and he stretched the human consciousness. And Carl Jung says this about the importance of having and making a moral inventory. He says, the psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. So what he's saying is when we hold something inside of us that we think we're getting away, it's going to show up out here. Oh, think what's on that moral inventory. Do you want any of that to show up out here? Because it's going to. Sooner or later, it is going to if we don't do something about it. That is to say, when the individual remains undivided and does not become conscious of their inner opposite. It means when we want to deny that part of us. The world must perforce act out the conflict and be torn into opposing halves. And we see that play out all the time on TV. How many of us have had this great role model and we think, okay, there's somebody that's doing well in that, and then we find out they got this whole other side to them. Tiger Woods is the most famous one right now. Wow, here it looked like a guy that had it made, and then we found out, boy, did he have a hidden life that he was hiding. Did it come out into the world? Yeah, he went from being the most successful, talked about, revered athlete in the world, to becoming a joke line on late night TV. That undivided part that didn't get acknowledged, that was hidden away from lack of moral inventory. Carl Jung says the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. For no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. I mean, it's not easy. It is not easy to look at this. And from the book 12 Steps and 12 Traditions on page 43, we find, without a willing and persistent effort to do this, there can be little sobriety or contentment for us. Without a searching and fearless moral inventory, most of us have found that the faith which really works in daily living is out of reach. So how important is this place of just really getting honest with ourselves? It's not to be shared. It doesn't have to be shared with one other person. And it's not about a mental inventory list. It's actually taking what's in our mind and writing it through a pen on a piece of paper, not typing it out through a no-contact computer that pops up on a screen. In step 4, we call it a moral inventory because we compile a list of traits and behaviors that have transgressed our highest or moral values. We also inventory our good traits and the behaviors that represent them. Listen to this part, and it comes from A Hunger for Healing. In our life's moral inventory, the defects or dysfunctional behaviors might include some that once worked. Some dysfunctional behaviors may have saved our lives as children. Hear that word. Some of our dysfunctional behaviors may have saved our lives as children because we grew up with parents that were practicing their addictions, their bad behaviors, their unhealthy habits. And we had to create coping mechanisms because we were 8 years old and we couldn't go attend a class by Carl Jung to teach us how to go back into that family and remain grounded and stable in our spirit. So we had to do our very best to rely on our reptilian brain, which is not a part of our higher thinking aspect of our overall well-being, to get us through survival and create coping methods. And so many times we created dysfunctional coping methods, but they have now become out of date, self-defeating, and causes a great deal of trouble when we use them as adults. How many of you, when you were a little kid and you got your feelings hurt, you would start crying and scream and you would run away? How many of you as adults right now, when somebody tells you no or doesn't agree with you or makes some comment that you can't handle, you start crying, screaming, and walk away? And you don't know how to come back and deal with it. And you think the best thing is just don't acknowledge it and it'll just be okay. How many of us have coping skills like that we have carried from our childhood into our adult years? Anybody have one? All right, good. Arms are getting better. That's good. I just want to see if they'll go up and down, that's all. So that's why it's important that we deal with what's causing those behaviors within us. The purpose of a searching and fearless moral inventory is to sort through the confusion and the contradiction of our lives so that we can find out who we really are. We are starting a new way of life and need to be rid of the burdens and traps which have controlled us and prevented our growth. As we approach this step, most of us are afraid that there is a monster inside of us. And we don't want to release that monster. Why? Because it may destroy us or it may destroy those around us. This fear can cause us to put off our inventory or may prevent us from taking this crucial step at all. We have found that fear is lack of faith, and we have found a loving, personal God to whom we can turn. We no longer need to be afraid of that higher power. So I asked you earlier, and I'll ask you again, how many of us have put off our healing because of fear of what others may think? How many of us have put off our healing out of fear of what others may think of us if they ever found out? So I want you to understand that what we're talking about here in personal inventory isn't about being shared at work tomorrow. It's about between you and God, and next month we'll look at perhaps the ability to share it with one other person. One other person. But sometimes what happens is that there's that hesitancy to acknowledge our emotional pain. Because that if we ever do, that emotional pain that we may tap into will turn into such a raving monster that we won't ever be able to rein it back in. Acknowledging emotional pain may seem like an obvious step in the healing process. And we often assume that everyone is already doing it. You may have assumed that. I do. If you're in pain, you already know it, right? When you were growing up as a little kid, did you know your parents were in pain? At what point in your life of evolving into a teenager, a young adult, were you able to look at and analyze and examine your parents and the models and the role models they were for you and come to a point and understand that they were in emotional pain? And how many of us thought, well, we should have just known that. Why didn't we know it sooner? Didn't they know it? Why didn't they fix themselves? How many of us are just like that today? People are looking at us and going, man, they're in a lot of emotional pain. Why aren't they doing something about it? Don't take it for granted that people know they're in emotional pain, because when we've been in emotional pain, we don't know what it's like to be without emotional pain, because we become very comfortable. When we get in bed, we curl up with it. Not always do we understand that everybody knows they're in that emotional pain. Many of us have a surprising amount of emotional trauma that lies below our conscious awareness. In some cases, we might be aware of some of the symptoms of a wound within us, but we are unconscious of its deeper cause. A core place of constriction where life energy is blocked. The effects of this blockage can range from uncomfortable feelings of mild emotional pain at one end of the spectrum to severely debilitating physical and or mental disease at the more serious end of the spectrum. So where are we in our own individual lives in blocking the flow and restricting the flow and limiting the flow of that emotional pain? Because it's going to come out. And one way it will come out is possibly within our physical health. So when we restrict and hold that flow back, it can show up in many ways, as in this actual physical example. There is a factory in Essex which makes the Tickle Me Elmo dolls. The toy laughs when you tickle it under the arms. Well, a lady by the name of Shelley is hired at the Tickle Me Elmo factory. And she reports for her first day promptly at 8 a.m. in the morning. However, the next day at 8:45 a.m., there is a knock at the personnel manager's door, the one that hired Shelley. The foreman throws open the door and begins to rant about the new employee. He complains that she is incredibly slow, and the whole line is backing up. She is restricting and slowing down the entire production line behind and putting it behind schedule. The personnel manager decides he should see this for himself. So the two men march down to the factory floor. When they get there, the line is so backed up that there are Tickle Me Elmos all over the factory floor, and they're really beginning to pile up. At the end of the line stands Shelley, surrounded by mountains of Tickle Me Elmos. She has a roll of plush red fabric and a huge bag of small marbles. The two men watch in amazement as she cuts a little piece of fabric, wraps it around two marbles, and begins carefully to sew the little package between Elmo's legs. The personnel manager bursts into laughter. After several minutes of hysterics, he pulls himself together and approaches Shelley. "I'm sorry," he says to Shelley, barely able to keep a straight face, "but I think you misunderstood the instructions I gave you yesterday. Your job is to give Elmo 2 test tickles." So how many things have we restricted in the flow of our life and we've misunderstood the cause of them? That just seemed like the thing to say. I have no idea if it really fits. It just seemed like it should. How many of us, though, have misunderstood and falsely carried shame from our past when the shame had nothing to do with us? In doing our moral inventory, it's important that we make sure that we're not carrying false shame. What's false shame? The shame that I carried in my life for so long of my mom being sexually inappropriate with me for 19 years. I thought it was my fault. Do you know how many people, the hundreds, I want you to get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people I've counseled around around sexual abuse, of molestation. And they felt shame because at 3 years old they thought they did something wrong that must have caused their parent or their brother or their next door neighbor or whoever it was to molest them. At 3. And what I have to do is work with that person really patiently and really cognitively for them to become aware of, at 3 years old, you did absolutely nothing wrong. But do you know how that energy has permeated today's society still, where where the general consciousness of the public still blames women for causing rape? And it was played out just last week or last week and a half ago in Saanich, where that girl is picked up here not too far from you, Vic, and if I don't have the address right, you'll be with me and be patient, at 10:30 on a Friday night, and was raped for 90 minutes by 4 guys and dropped off at the Save-On Memorial Coliseum. And what do the Saanich police come out and say? Girls, women, you need to be on guard. Because you can't be out at 10:30 at night, you can't wear a dress too short, and they're still placing the responsibility and the blame for rape on those that never caused it. At what point do we do a moral inventory as a society? Imagine if the collective consciousness of every city, of every province, of every state in the country and in the world had to do a moral inventory of its own way of treating its people. Wow, would we have some purging going on. Imagine if the governments had to write down the moral inventory of how they have unconsciously spent money, or how we have unconsciously dealt with people. Does this start to bring it home? Of how we have been to each other for whatever reason. Our biases have showed up and dominated our thoughts. I'm so affirming and committed to seeing that bias change, that because a woman is walking down the street and happens to have clothes on, it doesn't matter what it is, it's just they had clothes on, that somehow that is what is a cause for rape. When do we shift that consciousness? Right now, today. When do we start looking at it? When do we start owning up? Today. It's not about we'll get to it one day when the day is right. There is no such thing as a right day. We begin holding that consciousness, that we begin evolving, and that we are really looking at taking this moral inventory beyond ourselves. And one of the most important parts when we list down our moral inventory and our offenses, that we are transgressions upon ourselves and upon others, we may want to put them into 4 categories of resentments, fear, sex, and harm to others. But the most important part is when we get that moral inventory done, we want to pray. We want to pray. And earlier this week, if you're on the online community, Galena sent it to me about Masaru Emoto asking and calling for the people of the world to pray for the waters of Japan. And if you were here for meditation this morning, you know that we affirmed this simple prayer by Masaru Emoto, the doctor who discovered that our thought impacts water crystals. And what he said for the prayer was, the water of Fukushima nuclear plant. We are sorry to make you suffer. Please forgive us. We thank you and we love you. And I simply took that simple prayer and shifted it to apply to this healing that we're looking at around our moral inventory when we list out what we need to put down in an open, vulnerable, honest way between ourselves and God. And the first one is we looked at for the earth is to the lands, water, and consciousness of Mother Earth. We are sorry to have made you suffer. Please forgive us. We thank you and we love you. May we affirm this with vigor together. To the lands, water, and consciousness of Mother Earth. We are sorry to have made you suffer. Please forgive us. We thank you and we love you. And to our family, relationships, and our friends that maybe our behaviors have impacted, here's the prayer for that one. May we affirm this together. To my family, relationships, and friends, I am sorry for the suffering I have caused you. Please forgive me. I am thankful and I love you. Anybody in your life that you can use that prayer for? And finally, for ourselves, for all the times that we did not amplify, glorify, magnify the beauty of our spirit through our actions and behaviors and words. We say this one together. To my spirit, soul, mind, and body, I am sorry to have made you suffer. Please forgive me. I am thankful and I love you. How would it be to have those 3 or 4 simple prayers, if you want the one for the nuclear plant, sitting next to your computer, sitting on your bathroom mirror, next to your bedstand, and affirm them a couple of times a day? That's where we start, not waiting for that right day. For lots of people, what I've discovered is happiness to them is just around the corner. They just need to get their degree, a particular job, a promotion or a raise. Maybe they're waiting to get married or have a child. Perhaps they will be happy when they retire. But the author Alfred de Sousa says, for a long time it seemed to me that life was about to begin, but there was always some obstacle in the way, something to be gotten through, some unfinished business, time still to be served or debt to be paid. Then life would begin. At last it dawned on me that these obstacles were my life. And John Lennon adds to it by saying, life is what happens while you are making other plans. And finally, the point is, our lives are happening now. If we are to get the satisfaction and fulfillment that we want, we have to learn to draw pleasure and joy from everything that happens to us and around us, because these experiences are the very essence of our life. The more conscious we are that life consists of the journey and not the destination, the more likely we are to get the most out of life. So if there are things that you want to do, begin to fit them in now, or accept the fact that you can be happy whether or not you do them. Happiness isn't just around the corner, it's now or never. The good news is you have everything you need to be happy. Philosophers, poets, and scientists all agree it can't be attained through money, prestige, or power. Happiness is not a fact, it's a mindset. Let us turn within and pray into that mindset.